Hi, everyone. Just giving folks a minute to join. Welcome to Women in VC, the AI edition. This is one of a number of panels. And if you've been along for the ride, you may have been to some of the others, but that a group of women partners here at Lowenstein have hosted over the past year plus for our community of clients and friends who are women in venture capital and at companies that are venture funded. And so we've hosted these panels on legal topics with the goal of sharing what we know to help you be the smartest person in the boardroom and beyond. I'm Alyssa Frederick. I'm a corporate lawyer in Lowenstein's Palo Alto office in our emerging companies and venture group. And we do many venture financings every year. And as everyone in the field has seen, or anyone who's opened up a newspaper recently, there's been a huge amount of funding flowing into AI and effort and time that folks have spent integrating AI products into their companies. And as we all know, it is an evolving technology and it's on a regulatory frontier. So today we have two of our wonderful women from Lowenstein, Kathleen McGee, who is a regulatory expert, and Diane Moss, who's an intellectual property expert, to tell us a bit about what they're seeing and their advice on how to approach AI from their perspectives.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Alyssa. I'm Diane Moss. I'm counsel in Lowenstein's Emerging Companies and Venture Capital Group. My practice area is intellectual property and commercial transactions. So what that essentially means is that I draft and negotiate a lot of the enterprise and underlying agreements that tech companies use to develop and market and sell their products. These agreements can include terms of use, master services agreements, collaboration agreements, developer agreements, a host of agreements under which your services are provided. And I'll just say that recently what I've seen in my work with the explosion of AI is with respect to certain key provisions in these operative agreements, such as licensing provisions, your disclaimers, reps and warranties, indemnifications. There has been renewed interest from VCs seeking to invest in AI-driven businesses and the companies themselves to over these provisions to make sure that they're not overly or underly representing ownership or permissions regarding data and intellectual property. So my job is to protect against those understatements and loopholes in IP ownership, data use, rights to output from AI-driven tools, or the underlying code. So the reason that this is very important is that not protecting against this can destabilize a company, impact an investment, and ultimately constrain a company from being sold or subject the company to unwarranted or warranted IP infringement claims. Kathleen?
Thanks, Diane. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today. Kathleen McGee. I'm a partner in the ECVC and White Collar Group. I have about 20 years of government experience. As a criminal prosecutor, worked for the Bloomberg administration, and then most recently was the bureau chief for Internet and Technology in the New York Attorney General's office, which really meant that I oversaw policy, legislation, and enforcement on the civil side, not criminally, against every sort of tech company imaginable, from all of the, Uber mega breaches and COPPA privacy and Bluetooth and IoT and everything in between. So when I sit here in the hallway at Lowenstein Sandler, I spend a lot of time with our startups and the ECVC corporate side, helping to counsel and mitigate regulatory issues. And absolutely, AI is on everyone's lips these days. So really happy to be talking to you guys about what we're seeing and what we anticipate. From my perspective, we're going to be talking about what we anticipate is coming down the pike on the regulatory side, and really how to frame the way that you think about issues and evaluate, the business when you're sitting in the boardroom or making that pitch. So we're trying to just cover some basics today. I'm really glad that you're here. If you have questions, just pepper them in the chat. Someone's going to be monitoring, and we're happy to answer as we go along.
Right. As Kathleen said, like at the end of 2023, I think we both noticed some interesting movement around the AI regulatory front. And, the legal considerations in terms of protocols that were coming from the EU, principally the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, which is currently a draft. And then closer to home, the VC community has rallied and launched a set of guidelines promulgated by the Responsible Innovation Lab, which is a nonprofit organization of tech execs and investors. And they came up with these guidelines to set some guardrails for companies and startups and investors in the AI space.
So we're, because we're seeing this rapid tech development in the AI space, we're really keen to make sure that, attendees here have a sense of the trends that might impact your investment or, your business development if you're a founder joining us today. Maybe it's best just to kick it off into, into the numbers.
Right.
Diane,
Yeah. Here I am. I have some numbers for you because after all, we're talking about this because, AI does appear to be the next great tech platform, following the web, mobile, and the cloud. And lots of VCs and companies are in this space. Just to add some context, additional context, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, in 2020, 75 billion, 21% of global VC investment went into AI. And that's up from a 4% share or 3 billion from 2012. Geographically, the companies tend to be located in China and in the United States. And by sector, VC money in AI is going into three main sectors: companies developing driverless vehicles and related transportation, healthcare, pharma, and biotech, and business services automation. Where are we today, though, Kathleen?
Well, this is the big thing. At the risk of boring some of you, I thought it would be helpful to just set the stage on really what distinguishes artificial intelligence from machine learning and algorithmic work. So I wanted to do a little bit of a primer. And with that in mind, we're gonna be popping a little diagram up on the screen. In full disclosure, did not create this, lifted it from another publication, but it is a perfect depiction of, the most simplistic way about what's going on here. So with this in mind, artificial intelligence is really a term that's being used to describe how computers can perform the types of tasks that we would normally view as requiring human intelligence, assuming that we have intelligence going on in our brains here. Recognizing speech and objects, making some decisions based on data, and that's important, making decisions and translating languages. The AI structure mimics the human mind. So here you see the input layer is really data, whether it's data that you're learning from my voice right now, or data that the machine takes in from data input. Let's say in fintech, it's taking data in. There is an output, and the meaty sandwich, this hidden layer, is really the aspect that keeps iterating and learning and turning over and changing, which means this, it's really going to be hard, and I'm going to get to this in a minute. It's hard to have consistency on what the output is, because that hidden neural network, the strength of those connections between neurons changes as it develops, just like a human brain does. I mean, not just like, but you get the picture. So the network learns patterns and changes the way it learns and perceives data as it goes on. Oh God, well, Vitali, I'm taking a look at your comment. We should have you chime in later. So don't criticize me for my comments, because I am just trying to get very basic. And Vitali is doing neuroscience and AI with children, so I'm not here to compete. But at any rate, let's take this one off. And then I just want to get to, machine learning, for those of us who are not necessarily in the field, an application of AI in which computers are using these algorithms or rules embedded within software to learn from the data and adapt with experience. So, it does incorporate some of those AI models. The neural network, as we've talked about, is really that sort of the gray matter and what's going on within the gray matter. For me, the biggest concerns that I have when I'm talking to clients are what AI can do, and then where their limitations of fallibility lie. And there is a lot that AI can do, I think, fairly reliably. There's a lot more that people are constantly iterating on. We have clients who come in and one day they'll say, our product does A, B, and C. And literally the next day they're coming in and saying, now it can do 5 more things. You're like, okay, well, hold on. We have to, law and regulatory concerns and disclosures and all these other things. We need to help you build out your legal platform and ensure the reliability, ensure, the responsibility and the transparency, which we're going to get to. But we know that AI can presently do document review, fact analysis, research, and forecasting. Those are really basic terms for what we know that it can do. We know that their limitations and fallibility include knowing whether or not that AI output, what happens on the other end of that diagram, is actually consistently reliable. Is it aligned with your intent and your value? What data is coming in? Not everybody is as transparent about the data and the process that goes into feeding in the front end of the AI process. What systems was the AI taught on? How can we, with a reasonable degree of certainty, figure out how we can predict that AI will act predictably? I think there are some problems and some real concerns about that. And then, of course, we've all seen these examples in the news about bias, mistakes, and false information and hallucinations, which are effectively, either intentional or unintentional. I hate to use the term fake news, but fake news. A great example of utilizing AI for, also, I'm going to say nefarious purposes. It was in the news just this morning with the primary in New Hampshire, and the spoofing of Joe Biden's voice on robocalls that was probably used with some form of AI. So how that it's in our consciousness, it's in our culture. How are we taking a look at what's coming in our front door when we're sitting on a board, or when we're pitching an idea to a board? In the popular consciousness and culture of what AI is, and translating that into some concrete concerns and addressing of those concerns, right? Because we all in the general consciousness have an idea of what we think AI is, but you attending this call today actually know, some of you, I can see who's attending, have a real concrete basis for applying AI in your everyday business. So some of you may actually be dealing with some of the regulatory concerns that we're talking about today. I was going to give you some examples of the types of issues, like hallucinating, fake embezzlement claims, generating phishing email templates. I do quite a bit of work on privacy and data security, and I can tell you that, as a side, AI is going to be used very effectively in the forthcoming years to create amazing phishing exploits, resulting in the loss of billions of dollars, because the fake emails and generated content is going to be so believable. New York Times had a quiz yesterday, tell which face is generated by AI versus which one is not. It's virtually impossible to tell from a layperson which one is real and which one's not. So I think the next thing that we should really talk about are what are these responsible AI guidelines that you're going to be thinking about as you're framing your evaluation, either as a board member or as a founder who's pitching, as someone who's doing an investment and wants to understand how do I get my arms around whether or not this is a good investment, what are the criteria that I'm looking for beyond the glossy pitch, or how do I address some issues in my pitch in a way that are going to hit on some of what I think are concerns that people might be thinking about.
Just Kathleen, I'm
Yeah.
going to interject a moment because I think as we go into these guidelines, I think the accountability and transparency is definitely towards, everything is trending in that direction. And these issues that we're highlighting in terms of some of the shortcomings of AI, although there are a lot of efficiencies with respect to its use, those are the things that have become the target and the focus of a lot of the legislation, and legislation, regulations, court cases, and it will definitely impact how as you said, if you're thinking about investing or if you're developing a product, it will definitely shape those processes.
For sure. To frame how I, as a now former regulator, sitting in the shoes of a client, either examining something for due diligence on investment or preparing a client to go out into the world and, pitch a product. What are the sorts of things, as Diane says, that we're looking at? Well, that President Biden last year, October of last year, put out an executive order that really sort of designated all the federal agencies to start iterating on rules that they are eventually going to promulgate with respect to AI. And I mean every single federal agency. Some of you might be aware that the SEC has already started to accept comments on rules that they are probably going to promulgate later this year in 2024, having to do with artificial intelligence and technologies in the financial space. But big picture, as reflected by what Diane had to say, this executive order by President Biden focuses on a couple key elements within the private sector that we wanted you to be aware of. And it talks a lot about a couple basic tenets of regulatory concern that apply. It doesn't matter what industry you practice in. It doesn't matter if you're doing, fintech or medical or SaaS as a service. These generally fall into the lines of privacy and consumer protection, which, is one of my bedrock practices. And it really, as Diane indicated, means, are you clear, conspicuous, and transparent in the data coming in, how it's being used, and the product that is generated by your AI, your algorithm, your machine learning capabilities, and your disclosures. That is a basic tenet of regulatory law, whether you're operating in any practice. Intellectual property, which Diane's going to be talking about a little bit more, and so I won't really get into. But the true measure of the order's impact is going to be that there's going to be a trickle down through these federal entities to the various regulators at the federal level who are going to be telling you how you can or cannot run your business. And at the same time, those guidelines are going to be adopted by state and in some instances, city regulators who have a lot to say about how you run your business if you're utilizing AI. For example, New York City promulgated a series of rules in this last year having to do with artificial intelligence in hiring decisions and recruiting and employment. which are law and which hold, some serious penalties and injunctive relief if you don't comply with them. So I think that those are just framing on the federal level and how that's going to trickle down to the state. Artificial intelligence is on everybody's mind here. Diane, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit more about this really interesting industry commitment.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because I don't think we've seen the VC community rally around regulations for sectors that they're interested in the way that we're seeing their attention to AI. And, so earlier I mentioned the activity with respect to Responsible Innovation Labs guidelines that they produced in collaboration with the Biden administration. And I just thought it's important because we're going to see these themes through different regulatory efforts repeat themselves. So I think it's important for everybody to become familiar with what's on the minds of regulators, what's on the minds of the courts, and what's going to be decided on, and kind of big influences in this area. But the guidelines, I believe, were a clear effort to establish some guardrails for VC-backed startups, which are developing AI technology. And they do seek to encourage a collaborative effort amongst early stage companies, VCs, LPs, and they're centered around 5 principles. And I'm going to speak a little bit later about the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, but principles and fundamental rights are, again, things that are driving this, because some of the dangers which we lead to, as Kathleen mentioned, quote unquote fake news, it could be discrimination, the impacts and dangers are real. So I think AI has everybody's attention on the regulatory front to try to establish safe products. But the 5 principles that were promulgated for these guidelines by the community requiring organizational buy-in with startups. This speaks to implementing some internal governance processes so that there's a method for accountability and some framework internally in companies for them to understand what they're doing and answer questions regarding what they're doing. And it dovetails with transparency because documenting decisions on how and why an AI system is built, what its shortcomings may be, disclosing appropriate information externally and externally are a big part of regulation on the AI front from this community. They'd also like to see companies forecast the risks, the AI risks, because this will help identify foreseeable risks, which then could be addressed through auditing, testing, and product safety protocols. And then lastly, through the whole life cycle of the product, there's an interest in having attention to ongoing mitigation. So as you find problems, you address them, because any technology that's changing as swiftly as AI technology, there are going to be continuing issues. So you might fix one and you're going to find another. And I think what we see now is that some of the concerns about, perhaps quoting input data and output data is now deemed to be an error. It's not supposed to be something, a bargain for risk. So you're going to see changing things happen through the life cycle of this technology. The other regulatory app happening that I did note was the EU AI Act. And while this isn't a law, it's very interesting. Kathleen and I noted that yesterday, the unofficial versions of the consolidated text of the act, some of it was leaked. The primary goal here, again, create a timeless legal framework that can address the development and use of this technology within the EU. But notably, and if you're familiar with the General Data Protection Regulation, like the GDPR, This regulation would also extend to systems outside of the EU that are used in the EU marketplace. So if you're a business operating in the EU with your technology, you will be held accountable under this regulation as well. Like the GDPR as well, it is rooted in the fundamental rights, protecting the rights and freedoms of individuals. So there's a lot of, let's protect the individual, let's protect the consumer. And we have some consumer laws here too that Kathleen's going to speak about. It's very comprehensive, addressing copyright. Here, I'm going to speak to some things that are happening and considerations that the courts will have under copyright law, but this law does seek to hold users accountable under the EU copyright law as well. Something interesting here, though, under this act is that there are tiers classifying the AU systems into 4 tiers: unacceptable, high risk, medium risk, and low risk. And these unacceptable or prohibited AI practices are those that are deemed to be particularly harmful for fundamental rights and societal values. And what will separate the highest and unacceptable tiers to the lower tiers will be the distinction between the potential harms and the corresponding legal requirements. Now, generative AI is like ChatGPT has also been addressed, and there are going to be transparency requirements. You have to disclose that the content was generated by AI, design the model to prevent it from generating illegal content, publishing summaries of copyright data that's used for training. So there's a high amount of transparency, visibility requirements, accountability.
I wanted to just flag, actually, maybe we can let people know where they can find.
Let's put it in the.
Or the RILVC voluntary commitments that we've talked about, because if you're looking for, obviously we would love for you to want to talk to us more about those particular things, but really, we don't have a stage presentation for you today. So we can maybe drop it into the link to the chat so that you can pull up the data on those guidelines and take a look at them and then follow up with us on further questions. So I will do that for you.
That's great. As I said, the EU timeline, the timeline for the EU Act will be a couple years after it's implemented, and it will be installed in phases. So again, for people who violate, there's going to be accountability with fines that could range from $7.5 to $35 million. I can talk about legal considerations too, Kathleen, because along with the regulatory front, courts may also have a role in shaping AI businesses. And because many of the AI models that companies are using for their products are being built, at least in part, on data that's under US copyright protection. So the concern is that infringement cases could have the potential for disrupting the cost structures for those companies churning with VC dollars. And also, if companies haven't contemplated it, licensing fees may apply. So again, these are things when I look at my agreements, whether I'm, doing diligence for a VC company, or whether I'm looking to vet a company with an AI product, or whether I'm drafting agreements for a company to market or develop a product, I'm going to think about these things because, cost disruptors are not good for either VCs or the companies, their target companies. On the legal front, though, I think that the doctrine that will be very important for the courts to consider will be the fair use doctrine, which allows creators to build upon copyrighted work to produce something that's transformative. And among other factors that would be considered would be proving that the content has been substantially changed and is not competing in the same market to substitute the original work. So many in the community producing and involved with AI are, they're saying, their models don't plagiarize, they're not regurgitating information, but it does happen. And again, if this fair use doctrine is applied, it would be a standard by which all the output would be judged, so that there'd be accountability on the court side as well. But I do expect it to take a while before the courts actually convene to decide on this. I think a lot of cases will settle and licensing fees will be paid in the meantime. On the consumer front, Kathleen, what?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the transparencies and disclosures and, the data in, data out, and how you maintain accountability. One of the things that I really liked about the RIL principles are that they do track, as Diane said, they track not just the Biden executive order and their concerns, but they provide, that sort of formula and checklist in categories. And one of them is certainly having to do with these disclosures. When you are representing particularly in a B2C context, but I think frankly, you're going to have to do this when it comes to due diligence and any sort of investment or acquisition. And we're already seeing it iterate out when we have clients with AI products or algorithm products who are going through an investment process. You're going to have to make sense of what is going into the algorithm and what's coming out of the algorithm. And some of the big keywords that I would love for you to take back with you are accountability and transparency in every sort of phase of the AI development process. Also ensuring that you have systems and policies in place to map and disclose and track and audit on a regular basis internally. There's always going to be a concern that if you see that there's something wrong with the algorithm or the AI process, and you make a note of that, that somehow is opening yourself up to a vulnerability. But the fact of the matter is, if it exists, you can't hide it. You're going to have to just address it. And regulators, we forecast, are going to ensure that you've documented on a regular basis that you are checking that process. So like frankly, any machine, you're going to have some sort of responsibility for making sure it's charged, or you've changed the oil, or whatever analogy you want me to use. You need to make sure that the machine is working the way that it's intended, and that there's a statement of intent and a purpose. Why is that? Well, if you are interfacing with artificial intelligence presently as a consumer, there are already some expectations out there. The FTC is, for example, suggesting this, and certainly it will be so in the European Union. And it's going to be so with the SEC and certainly other regulators. There's going to be an expectation that you disclose it, much like, now if I go on to social media and I see something that looks like an ad, smells like an ad, it is an advertisement, and it should be disclosed as such. #ad, #sponsor. We're moving to the next level with artificial intelligence. So if I am speaking with a chat bot, that chat bot has to be disclosed. Hi, I'm Kathleen Bot. I'm not actually a human being. If the product that I'm purchasing is really generated by artificial intelligence, you're going to probably expect that you're going to have to disclose that that is in fact the case. If a product is generated using AI, should be disclosed. If the data, process, and outcomes of the AI generated products are not documented and disclosed, you're going to have a really painful time when someone demands to see that audit trail. So again, just fundamentally, and I have a feeling that some of you in the audience are already doing this in your practices with AI, but you know, it is so important to be documenting really methodically and regularly what those processes are.
Kathleen, I also have to believe that a lot of the new guidelines, even if it's from RIL, had to be influenced by these consumer concerns and you know, positions that are already in place, because they're said a little bit differently, but the theme is consistent. You know, using the product responsibly, disclosure. I mean, those are very consistent concerns on both fronts.
100%. Much of what we're talking about today, particularly when it comes to sort of these consumer disclosure or transparency mandates that we anticipate are coming through in formal federal or state or local regulatory edicts in the next year, are actually already law. They are law under the consumer protection statutes that are the lay of the land. They are very elastic. They cover all sorts of instances. If you've ever taken a look at news from a regulator and said, God, they seem to be calling everything false and deceptive, that's because they can under these consumer protection laws. And it will include things that right now AI is getting more adoption in, creating fees and rating structures, credit designations. I'll be speaking to a conference of creditors the next month on their adoption of AI in evaluation of credit. And the CFTC is already all over that, as is the CFPB. So that, there are a lot of different people interested in how you're evaluating utilizing AI to make determinations on credit. Whether or not the end product is in the consumer's best interest, the question then becomes, and Diane alluded to this earlier, does the AI actually generate a product that might be in violation of basic constitutional rights or other, protected class laws? Or is the AI somehow generating a product that ultimately ends up creating other sorts of consumer harm in the antitrust space? A really fascinating lawsuit, which you should, I'd say, all watch. I will watch it for you, but that I think is really super interesting, has to do with, initially it was started by tenant advocates against RealPage, which utilizes algorithms and maybe artificial intelligence to provide landlords with real-time pricing for their rental units. And a lot of landlords across the country utilize this algorithm and are subscribers to what's happening with this company. But the problem is that the allegations are now that this has resulted in price fixing, where the company that's issuing the algorithms is effectively the hub, and all of the property managers and landlords are the spokes on the wheel of a large antitrust conspiracy to maintain equal pricing in violation of consumer protection laws and antitrust laws for rental units in housing. What does that mean in layperson language? You're screwed when it comes to trying to find affordable housing because the landlords are all using the same pricing app and they're colluding with each other to keep prices high.
Right.
That's the allegation. And the allegation is that they're using, algorithms and AI to do it.
So some of the backstop that'll happen in some of these new regulations will be the requirement that companies and investors really determine whether it is the best use case and the appropriate use case for the technology, and I think this was a perfect example of, an assessment of, yes or no, but it would have to be done before. And when we speak later, we're going to say why certain things aren't best practices now when you're thinking about, contracting to sell your business or your products. because a lot of this information will be diligence that will be uncovered and can impact the, the value of your proposition, so very interesting.
So maybe we should talk just a little bit about, we've talked a lot about big picture policy, and we've talked a lot about what we think are either the rules that are already at play or things that are coming down the pike. Maybe we should just get down to how to create a responsible program, or your checklist as a member of the board.
Right. And, Kathleen, this probably should be something we can share later too. I think it may be, actually, it's probably part of the guidelines, but what was nice about the guidelines is that they included a method to implement them. And, it really did provide a framework to work from. So I know they want organizational buy-in, for startup leadership team. And this means, as I mentioned earlier, creating internal governance processes, including a forum for diverse stakeholders to provide feedback on the impact of new products and to identify risk mitigation strategies.
I like the idea of this organizational buy-in. I do think it's really important that boards stay involved and aware of, just like they're now starting to have to do when it comes to information security. That they're aware of the development and the checklists and backstops as the AI is trained, used, and maybe that's something that goes to an audit committee. Maybe there is a separate committee that's created within the board, but that there is a reporting mechanism where the board has some buy-in and ongoing input into going.
And Kathleen, I just add one thing. Chandra here. Hi, everyone. I think that reporting mechanism is super important at the board level. And I think growing, sort of exercising that muscle when there aren't issues has your board prepared and in a great place to react when issues do crop up. And so making it part of your sort of regular check-in with the board, part of your regular report, even if it's just, here's what we're doing and everything's going great, or here's what we're thinking about and we haven't noticed any issues, that's great because it becomes part of the regular cadence. And then when there is an issue, your board's informed, they know what you've been doing, but they're also used to hearing you talk about what you're doing in this area. And it just is a much better place to be in as a board, whether you're sort of management doing the reporting or whether you are sitting on the sort of outside directors or independent director space asking for this type of reporting from your companies.
That's exactly right, Chandra. And, the guidelines really do address the need for regularity in dialogue and accountability, regular meetings where these things are discussed so that they're not like, you don't have to call an emergency meeting, but everybody's in the loop, everybody's informed. And, there's really no excuse, I think, for people not to know what's going on. It's not just a kind of IT issue or anything, it's a company-wide issue and from top down. And that's what is definitely built into these guidelines, even with respect to external stakeholders as well.
And I think that there's a way for boards and founders to structure the process. Again, a nice way to think about how to flow up information and how to create these policies is to look at the best practices for information security, which are already or should be fairly established within your organization. If not, please call us. But really understanding that there's a company-wide policy, there's a set of board guidance on this, that to Diane's point, things are not siloed just to IT or just to legal or just to the AI product development team. That there's really a cohesive effort to make sure that people are constantly having that level of transparency about what's going on surrounding this technology, and that they develop a meeting structure that really maps to the design of the policies that you've created. I love, Chandra, your comment on muscle memory. this is something new that people are going to have to get really facile talking about. And so starting early is a good idea. One of the other things that is highlighted, we've talked about it quite a lot, is the word transparency. I think transparency in your model is key to, to an investor. It's key to the consumer, it's key to the regulator. Frankly, it's key to your mission statement and what you're doing. Grounding in on the transparency there and publishing your value statement if you want to, or thinking about what it is that you do. I am very impressed by, some of the people attending today who are really operating in the thick of this. So if you want to volunteer something, please raise your hand and do so.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in? Hi, it's Alyssa. One other comment. So many of us are in the early stage venture funded company space. And, we all know that when you're founding a company, you're building a business from scratch. There are a lot of things to focus on. First, building the product, the business. And so sometimes thinking about regulation just it falls off and is not something that you pick up until later. But I think there's a lot of value that an independent director or the first investor director can have in just mentioning it to the founder, talking through the fact that these regulations are evolving and, and asking how the company's thinking about it. And then for a founder, just can be really valuable to have a high level conversation with someone like Kathleen early on. You may not have the time, you may not be spending a lot of legal dollars on this early on, depending on how important it is to your business, but just having a strategic conversation and getting a sense of the landscape from someone who's following it closely can be really helpful to set you up for success.
A lot of free
You
half
get to the next level.
The free 30 minutes, but it's actually really useful. I'll actually just for a second, I just want to step to the side of our formal presentation and say, excuse me, I had a wonderful conversation with a client the other day. They are an AI-based technology company working in a space that is highly regulated and in the healthcare space. And they are iterating on their product truly every day. Every day there's another call. Now we're doing this with our product. It's like, okay, finally we had a call and we said, you haven't had the time, but your growth has been exponential in the last 6 months, huge growth. It is time for us to sit and talk about how we're creating these policies, how we're building out procedures and disclosures and transparency mechanisms to fit not just the company that you're going to be tomorrow, which is going to be different than the company today, but just to build out for the potential of what you want to be 6 months from now. Which meant really having a conversation about hopes and dreams on the AI level with the abilities and the data and a lot of other stuff. An incredibly fulfilling conversation, frankly, and one that gets me even more excited about the potential of that particular client and their company and what they're doing, because they now have a roadmap that's not just a regulatory roadmap or a policy roadmap. They understand a little bit more, hopefully, coming out of the conversation, the inflection points in their business decisions and business development that will come with another cost. It's not just, this is a great idea, this is going to hit this market share, this is a novel development in AI. It is, here are the other things that you're going to have to do once you hit that benchmark that are going to impact your business decisions, because you have to tag data or you have to do something else on the back end. So really, I agree, Alyssa, when you are a startup, you are 2 people and you're really smart and you're trying to make it work. But I have been surprised at how surprised our clients have been at how exponentially fast their growth trajectory is, particularly in AI, and how very soon it's worthwhile to talk to Diane and myself for that free 30 and sort of say, okay, like, what are we looking at if this is our plan? What's on the horizon? You'll find it just makes for a better business plan.
Yeah,
Frankly,
so I don't mean to
Like-
minimize the importance of tracking the regulations and the IP concerns, because it depends on your business, how integral the like structuring, the product and the business within this regulatory framework are. And we've seen that in other industries, fintech, crypto as an example. We've had companies that have structured an entire business, pitched it to investors, gotten funding, but they had not received the regulatory advice that actually would have guided them in a very different direction. And they wasted a lot of time and money trying to build something that just was non-compliant. And if you're in an industry that is really heavily regulated, like you're basically selling securities, in the fintech crypto example. But AI is another one where these regulations are coming up. And they're,
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, by the time you get to market with your product, if you haven't figured these things out or fleshed them out a little bit more, it becomes increasingly more difficult to offer your product or service or navigate how somebody like I am to look at the kind of ownership language and perhaps untangle things that weren't quite in your mission if you haven't looked at the regulatory piece ahead of that. So it all goes hand in hand.
very true. I think some of the other, I know we're coming up on minutes left, but I just, to highlight lastly, understanding that if you're utilizing AI, you really are going to have to come up with some internal audits, and you should be expected that that's going to be part of a due diligence request. People are going to want to see how you're doing to test and verify that the product is being generated in a consistent basis, that you're doing what you say you're doing with what you have in terms of AI. I think with our last couple minutes, we should just dive into some of those internal policies, maybe a little bit more.
Sure. With the regulations in mind, we wanted to close by sharing some best practices, which we feel right now could be enormously helpful. Prioritizing legal operations of business with particular concern around proprietary rights, infringement, and confidentiality. Many companies are developing and implementing internal policies for employees, which govern the use of generative AI tools. And, these tools may facilitate work efficiency and production, as well as those incorporating AI source software, open source software. So into the development of their products. So these are important in commercial transactions and for employees and companies that develop products using free and open source software. I may let you do this, Kathleen. Tongue twisters, open source software for the intention. These policies create awareness around understanding compliance with software license obligations and the potential for legal liability amongst developers.
And if you're using it within the workplace, and let's face it, even if you think you're not, you are. I mean, people are using it regularly. Policies are setting those guardrails and boundaries, and generally require disclosure to management that you're using them, limits for using them beyond the prescribed use cases, and allow you to create some management accountability for your employees. So certainly not. The other thing to think about is in your contractual relationships with vendors. You should definitely have some policies and some language and some litmus tests for what types of things you're willing to accept in terms of indemnifications, representations, and warranties on your vendor's use of AI in delivering their product to you. Because all of that, as they say, flows downhill. And you really want to make sure that you know what are in your contracts now with respect to AI with other people that you're doing business with.
And if we think about, I go back to privacy, a lot of this does mirror, with your vendor relationships in the space of privacy and data security. You conduct vendor due diligence. Again, very important here in the AI space to duplicate that. You will be responsible or sometimes ask for representations about your vendors. So it's very important to vet them as well to limit liability.
Big picture, I think, I'll give my 30 seconds, Diane, give your 30 seconds if there are any others. People who want to pipe up, we'd be happy to listen. But I think big picture, this next year is going to be truly a light speed year for regulatory issues, for lawsuits, and for really advancement in AI generally across the board in all industries, legal and otherwise. When things go really fast, it's that move fast, things get broken. But to Alyssa's point earlier, it is so important, I feel, as someone who spent 20 years enforcing against entities that had violated consumer trust or violated criminal tenets. I think it's really important that you take a minute in your development or a minute as you're evaluating your company or a minute in the board and think about some of the things that we've at least highlighted for you today. Ask the provocative questions, think a little bit about process. It is only going to help you with your investment. It's only going to help you with your pitch. It's only going to help you be a little better prepared because all of the issues we've raised today are inevitably going to fall somewhere within your purview. If you're here today, you're going to hit on some of these issues.
Right. And I'd also say just keep track of state law as well, because Congress may be a little bit slower to come up with some federal legislation. States tend to act a little bit more quicker. Their processes are a little bit more nimble. But again, you might see more industry guidelines. You might see things popping up in the states to pay attention to as well. I think that Congress and the larger government is still looking into and understanding AI. So before they can actually make a decision or agree to act in any one direction. So I would look to the states first.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Diane and Kathleen. This has been educational for me. And thank you to everyone who's attended. It's always great to gather this community. We are rolling out office hours and mentorship circles for our women in VC. So I hope to see many of you soon.
Thank you.